They say time heals all wounds. They are liars. 20 years. 7,300 days. I have counted every single one of them. That is the wait in hotel rooms from Atlanta to Seattle, from studio apartments in Brooklyn to penthouse suites that cost more per night than my father earned in a month. 20 years of carrying the same weight, the weight of a ring I never got to place on her finger, the weight of the last that was stolen from me before it even began. My name is Michael Cooper. I was born in 1972 in a town so small it didn't have a traffic light, in a state that people on the coast forget exists. I am the younger of 3 brothers. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who got left behind. And I am the one who is going to make them pay. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance. Subscribe to 星号 Noise Awakening 星号 for more slow burn stories of passion, betrayal, and second chances. Our house sat at the end of Mulberry Road, 3 miles outside the county seat of Harrogate, Kentucky. It was a white clapboard place with a porch that wrapped halfway around, and in the summer the wisteria climbed so fat over the east side that you could hear it rustling before you even turned onto our dirt driveway. My mother planted those vines the year my father proposed to her. By the time I was old enough to understand what love meant, they had swallowed the entire eastern wall. My father was a mechanic. He could fix anything with an engine truck, tractors, the outboard motor that some fishermen from the lake would drag into our yard. He worked 12, 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, and when he came home at night his hands were always stained the same dark gray, no matter how much he scrubbed at them with that orange soap we kept by the pump outside. He died when I was 17. Heart attack. One of those things that happens so fast you don't believe it until days later, when you're standing in the kitchen reaching for his coffee mug and you realize there's no one left to hand it to. That was the year everything changed. My oldest brother, Vincent, was 23 then, already married, already living in a brick ranch house in town with his wife Snow, not his wife, with 星号 Rebecca 星号. It wasn't until years later that I understood how it had all unfolded, how the betrayal had been set in motion long before I ever knew her name. Vincent had always been the golden one, handsome in a rough, easy-way square job, dark hair that fell just right, a smile that made people trust him before he said a single word. My mother used to say Vincent to sell as to a man freezing to death and made him thank him for it. My father, before he died, used to stand next to Vincent at the county fair and swell waves twice so obvious it made me want to disappear. 2 fine boys, people said. Look at those 2 Cooper boys. I was the 3rd one, the one who came after. The one who didn't have Vincent's easy charm or my oldest brother David's quiet steadiness. I was skinny, serious, with glasses that never sat straight on my nose. I read books. I asked too many questions. I was the boy who mended his own clothes because our mother was already tired enough, and who took apart the broken clock on the mantel just to see how it worked and put it back together again with pieces left over, and somehow, impulsively, it ran better than before. My father once told me I had hands that could build a world out of scraps. He said it like he was proud, but there was something in his eyes that looked like pity. He knew what the world did to boys like me. Boys who thought too much. Boys who felt too deeply. First, who looked with a ferocity that had no place in a world that rewarded only the quick and the smooth. I was 20 years old when I met Rebecca Stone. She was 22, and she had come to Harrogate to teach at the elementary school, a position that had opened up because the previous teacher had run off with a traveling salesman, and as the tongue was still scandalized enough to talk about it. Rebecca had bright red hair that she wore in a long braid down her back, and she wore these round wire-frame glasses that made her look like a librarian, except no librarian had ever made my heart stop the way she did when she walked into the diner on Main Street and asked me to pass her the sugar. I was sitting in the booth by the window, drinking coffee I didn't want and pretending to read a magazine. She slid into the seat across from me, not across from me. She sat in my booth, directly across from me, close enough that I could smell lavender soap, and said, "I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but you've got the sugar. I've been without caffeine for 3 hours and I think I might actually die." She said it so seriously that I laughed before I could stop myself. And when she looked at me over those ridiculous round glasses, she laughed too, and the sound of it made me feel like I was 17 again, standing in the garden behind the house, watching the wisteria bloom for the first time that spring. "My name's Rebecca," she said. "Rebecca Stone. I'm the new second-grade teacher." "Michael Cooper," I said. And then, because my hands had gone clumsy with nervousness, I knocked the sugar bowl over. It went everywhere across the table, onto my lap, onto the floor, and she just started laughing again, this time so hard she had to take her glasses off to wipe her ass. That was it. That was the moment. The sugar all over everything, and her laughing with her glasses in her hand, her ass bright and wet, and me sitting there covered in white granules like some kind of idiot child. And I thought, 幸好 I am going to marry this woman, 幸好. I was 20 years old, and I had never been so certain of anything in my life. She moved into the apartment above the hardware store on Main Street. It was small, 1 bedroom, a kitchen that could barely fit a table for 2, a bathroom with a tub that creaked every time you stepped into it. But she filled it with plants. She hung curtains in the window, yellow curtains that caught the morning light and turned her whole apartment into something warm and alive. She painted the front door turquoise, and when I asked her why turquoise of all colors, she said, "Because life is too short to paint your door the color everyone expects." I fell in love with her in pieces, not all at once the way they describe it in novels, though we had that too, that first overwhelming rush, but in small, specific moments. The way she read aloud to herself while she graded papers, murmuring the words like she was tasting them. The way she sang while she took, always slightly off-key, always the same 3 songs rotated. The way she looked at me when I told her about my father, her eyes going soft and serious, and how she reached across the table and held my hand and said, "Tell me more. Tell me everything." The way she made me feel like my story was worth telling. Within 6 months, I knew. Within a year, I bought the ring. It was nothing special, a small diamond in a white gold setting, nothing like what she deserved. I had been sailing for months, putting aside every dollar I took spare from my job at the garage where I worked alongside Vincent. The diamond was barely half a carat, and when I put it on her finger in the garden behind my mother's house, with the wisteria blooming all around us and the evening light turning everything gold, she looked down at it and started to cry. "I was wondering when you asked," she whispered. And then she kissed me, and the world narrowed to the place where our mouths met, and I thought, 幸好 this is it. This is the rest of my life. This is what happiness feels like, 幸好. We set a date. October. When the maples in Harrogate turned colors so vivid they looked like they'd been tainted by someone who had just discovered the entire spectrum for the first time. We wanted to get married in the church, The old stone one on the hill with the bell that rang every Sunday at noon. Rebecca had already picked out her dress, every lace, simple, elegant. She showed me a picture in a magazine and I said it was beautiful, and she said, "You have to say that. You're marrying me." And I said, "No. I say it because it's Xinghao is Xinghao beautiful. And so are you. So beautiful it makes me afraid." She laughed at that. She always laughed when I said things that came from the deepest part of me. She said I was a romantic, and she said it like it was a compliment, and I believed her. I was so certain. I was so goddamn certain. The engagement lasted 4 months. In that time, I told everyone. I told the guys at the rod. I told my mother, who cried and held Roberta's hands and said she had never seen her boy so happy. I told my brother David, who was living in Lexington by then, working construction. David was the quiet one, the steady one, the one who never said much, but when he did say something, you listened. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "She's good for you, Mikey. Don't let her go." And I told Vincent over beers at our mother's kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon in August, 3 months before the wedding. Rebecca was upstairs taking a nap. She'd been tired lately. The pregnancy exhaustion everyone joked about, and Vincent and I were sitting there with our boots muddy on her kitchen floor, and I told him we were getting married. He congratulated me. He shook my hand. He poured me another beer and said, "To the happy couple." And I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance. Subscribe to 星号 Noah's awaiting in 星号 for more slow burn stories of passion, betrayal, and second chances. It started small. The things that shatter a life always begin so small you don't think to protect yourself. Vincent began showing up at the apartment above the hardware store. He said he was bringing by tools for the baby's room. Rebecca were pregnant now, 3 months long, and she kept talking about hanging shelves and fixing the creaky bathroom door. Vincent knew how to do those things better than I did. He was the older brother, the one who had built his own debt, who had remodeled his entire basement, who could do in an afternoon what would take me a week. So when he offered, I said yes. Of course I said yes. He brought her toffee. I didn't think anything of it. He was being neighborly, I told myself, being a good brother-in-law before there even was one. He helped her move a bookshelf. He fixed her bathroom door. He sat with her while I was at work and talked to her about the baby, about names, about what it was like to grow up in Harrogate as a Cooper boy, and she listened, because that was who she was. She listened to everyone. She made everyone feel heard. I noticed the first real change about 6 weeks before the wedding. Rebecca had been acting strained, distant, detracted, the kind of quiet that felt different from her usual contemplative silence. She would start sentences and not finish them. She would look at me with an expression I couldn't read, something that swittered across her face so fast I could never touch it fully. One night I asked her if she was having second thoughts, and she looked at me with those white eyes behind her glasses and said, "No, Michael. Never. I'm just tired." But she was meeting Vincent. I found out about it by accident, by pure, accidental timing that I had never once believed was actually accidental. I came back to the apartment one afternoon to pick up a jacket I left, and I heard laughter in the stairwell. Her laugh and another laugh, a lower one, a familiar one. I opened the door to the stairwell and there they were, on the landing halfway between the second floor and the third, sitting side by side on the top step. Roberta had her head turned toward Vincent, and he was saying something to her, his face close to hers, and she was laughing at it. They both looked up when they heard the door. Roberta's face went white. Vincent's went blank carefully, perfectly blank, like a mask gliding into place. "Michael," Rebecca said. Vincent was helping me with the shelf in the baby's room. It fell, and I was asking him. The shelf fell, I repeated. It did, Vincent said. His voice was calm. Too calm. It was the big one in the corner. I'm just helping her get it back up. I looked at the shelf. It was fine. It was exactly where it had always been, untouched and moved. Neither of them said anything. I looked at my brother, my 星号 older brother 星号, and something shifted in my chest that day, something cold and sharp, a blade sliding into a place I didn't know I had. But I didn't do anything. Not then. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself that Wei Xinghao was my brother, that he would never, that he Xinghao to Xinghao, never, and I told myself that Rebecca loved me, that she was going to marry me, that we were going to have this baby and this life and this future, and I chose to believe it because the alternative was too enormous to hold in my mind. I wish I had listened to that cold blade. I wish I had followed it. The wedding was in October. September ended, and the leaves on the maples began to turn, and every morning I woke up and looked at Rebecca sleeping next to me and thought, 星号 in 3 weeks. In 3 weeks she's my wife, 星号. She left me 4 days before the ceremony. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't explain. She left a note on the kitchen table. 星号, I'm so sorry. Michael, I can't do this. Please don't hate me. I have to go, 星号, and she took it back and she laughed. I found the note when I came home from the garage, and I stood in that kitchen with the yellow curtains she had hung in the window and the shelf that wasn't broken and the dust on the counter from the bread she baked every Sunday morning. And I read her handwriting and I didn't understand a single word. I called everyone. Her mother in Cincinnati, her sister in Lashua, the police, David in Lexington, and he called Vincent, and he answered on the first ring, and he said, Mikey, I'm so sorry. I'm here. What can I do? She wasn't with Vincent. I was certain of that. I told everyone, searched everywhere, her apartment, the church, the diner on Main Street, the park by the lake. Nothing. She had vanished. And 4 days became 5, and 5 became a week, and the wedding came and went, and I stood alone in the church on the hill with the bell that rang every Sunday at noon, and I listened to it ring and I thought, so this is what losing everything feels like. It was David who told me. David, who never said much, who had always been the steady one, the reliable one. David who drove 3 hours from Lexington to Harrogate and set me down at my mother's kitchen table and said, Mikey, she's with Vincent. I didn't believe him. I couldn't. It was so simple and so terrible and so obvious that it felt like a dream, the kind where you see the thing you should have seen all along, but your mind refuses to assemble the pieces until someone does it for you. David told me everything. He had found out from a cousin who had seen them together in Louisville. Roberta and Vincent. At a hotel. Together. They had been together for weeks, maybe longer. Maybe from the very beginning. Maybe from the moment Vincent had slid into that booth across from her at the diner and looked at her with those dark eyes and that easy, winning smile. He's been planning it, David said. His voice was flat, controlled, but I could see his jaw working. Since you got engaged, he's been working on her, Mikey. I don't know how or why, but he has. I sat at that table for a long time. My mother's kitchen, with the wisteria outside the window and the coffee going cold in the pot, and my father's old shirt hanging on the hook by the door, the one he wore when he worked on engines, the one that still smelled like motor oil and orange crush soap. I sat there and I felt something inside me to let a building brought down by a controlled demolition. That everything that had been holding me upright was suddenly, deliberately removed. Vincent had taken her. Not just taken her, he had worked on her. He had gone to her apartment and fixed her shelf and brought her coffee and sat with her on the stairs and said things to her that I will never know. He had spent weeks dismantling the life we had built together, piece by piece, until she didn't have the strength to walk down the aisle. And he had done it all while looking me in the eye, while shaking my hand, while pouring me a beer and saying, 星号 to the happy couple, 星号. My own brother. I went to his house. I don't remember the drive. I remember standing on his front porch and pounding on the door until my sis ate, and when he opened it, he didn't look surprised. He didn't look ashamed. He looked at me with those dark-eyed, and he said, Mighty. I hit him. I hit him so hard I broke my hand on his jaw. He staggered but didn't fall, and when he straightened up, there was blood on his lip, and he wiped it away with his thumb and looked at me and said, Feel better? I didn't. I didn't feel better. I felt like the ground had opened up beneath me and I was falling through an emptiness so vast and so dark that I couldn't see the bottom. She's not coming back, Vincent said. You know that, right? She's not coming back. I went home. I sat in my truck in my mother's driveway for 3 hours, staring at the wisteria, watching the last of the purple blooms clinging to the ones in the October cold. And then I got up, and I went inside, and I told my mother that Rebecca and I had called off the wedding. I told her it was over. I didn't tell her why. I couldn't. Some things are too ugly to let out of your mouth. The baby, our baby, she kept it. I found that out later. David told me. Rebecca Stone and Vincent Cooper had a daughter. They named her Lily. They got married in a courthouse in Louisville 6 months after she was born. I saw the wedding announcement in the Harrogate Gazette, 星号 Vincent Cooper West Rebecca Stone 星号, and I looked at the photo and I looked at my brother's smile and I looked at Rebecca's face, and I didn't recognize the person in that picture. She looked like a stranger. Someone who wore my fiancée's face but had none of her warmth, none of her laugh, none of the light that I had fallen in love with in a diner on a spring afternoon when sugar went everywhere. That was the last time I cried about it. I promised myself that. I have kept that promise for 20 years. I have not cried since, but I have never not for a single day forgotten. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance. Subscribe to 星号 Noise Awakening 星号 for more slow burn stories of passion, betrayal, and second chances. I left Harrogate in November. The maples were bare by then, their branches like stark veins against the gray sky, and the wisteria had lost all its leaves and looked like a skeleton of the thing it had been in the spring. I packed everything I own into the back of my truck, which wasn't much: clothes, a toolbox, my father's old watch, and photographs of Roberta I had tucked out of a roll of film from a picnic we had taken in July, the two of us on a blanket by the river, her head on my shoulder, the light perfect, the moment frozen forever. I didn't say goodbye to Vincent. I didn't go to his house. I didn't look at the brick ranch he had built or the life he had taken from me. I drove out of Harrogate on a Tuesday morning in the Great Weedell, and I didn't look back once. My mother stood in the driveway. She was 57 years old and she had already lost her husband, and now she was watching her youngest boy drive away. And I know that look. I can still see it in my mind because it was the look of someone who understood exactly why you were leaving, even though it was breaking her heart to watch you go. She pressed $100 into my hand before I got in the truck. "For death," she said. And then she said, "You come back when you're ready, Michael Cooper. This is still your home." I didn't know when that would be. I didn't know if it would ever be. I drove to Chicago. I didn't choose it. I just drove north until I hit a big city, and that was Chicago. I had $300, a tubuck, and a high school education. I slept in the truck for the first week, then in a shelter in the South Loop, then in a rooming house in Tayson where the radiator made sounds like a dying animal and the man in the room next to mine played trumpet. At 3 in the morning, I got a job washing dishes at a restaurant on Clark Street. Then I got a job as a mechanic's apprentice at a shop in Wintertark, and the owner, a man named Hatter Dorsa, a Mexican immigrant who had come to Chicago with nothing and built a respected business over 30 years, looked at my hands and said, "You got good hands, kid. You feel things the way a mechanic needs to feel them. You want to learn." I wanted to learn. God, I wanted to learn. I wanted to take every broken thing in the world and fix it, because if I could fix things, then maybe I could fix the things that was broken inside me. I worked 16 hours a day. I read every manual I could find. I took apart engines and put them back together and took them apart again until I could do it blindfolded, until the smell of motor oil felt like the smell of my father's hands, and that smell felt like the only honest thing left in the world. Within 2 years, I was running the shop. Hector had gotten sick his heart, the same thing that took my father, and he retired. And he sold me the business for a price I could afford because he said I reminded him of himself at 25. I renamed it Cooper's The Rush, and I hired 3 mechanics. And I worked 7 days a week, and I made something out of nothing the way my father said I would. But the money didn't fill the space where Roberta had been. Nothing filled it. I tried. I won't pretend I didn't try. I dated. I went to bars with the guys from the shop. I even had a serious relationship for a while. A woman named Lena who worked at a law firm nearby and who had dark curly hair and a laugh that could fill a room. She was good to me. She was kind, and she made me laugh, and when she looked at me I could almost forget the way Roberta used to look at me with that light in her eyes, that 星号吸引信号 of me, that sense of being known. But I could never give Elena everything. There was a room in my heart that I catlocked, and in that room was the diner on a spring afternoon and sugar everywhere and a woman with round glasses laughing so hard she had to take them off, and no matter how hard I tried, I could never close that door all the way. Elena left me after 2 years. She said she loved me, but she couldn't spend the rest of her life waiting for a ghost to leave. I didn't argue. I couldn't. She was right. I closed the shop 3 years after I bought it. Not because it was failing, it was thriving. I closed it because the pain had become too much to bear in a place where I could still walk past a yellow curtain and think of her, and the only way I knew to survive was to keep moving. So I sold the business, and I packed my bag, and I drove west. I spent the night stacking emotion. Dallas, Phoenix, Los Angeles. I worked at shops and quit when the memories start to head. I worked as a consultant for a chain of automotive stores and traveled to 50 cities in 18 months. I watched the country scroll past through windshields, cornfields and deserts and mountains and oceans, and everywhere I went, I carried the same weight. In Los Angeles, I met a man named Samuel Okonkwo. He was a liar, a defense attorney who had made a fortune representing people who had been wronged by the system, and he had a theory. He calls it the theory of the ledger, that every person who did you wrong owed you a debt, and the debt never disappeared. It just sat there, accruing interest, waiting to be paid. "You're carrying a debt, Michael," he said to me one night over bourbon at a bar in Silver Lake. "I can't see it in your face. Someone took something from you, and you haven't been able to let it go." "My brother," I said. I hadn't said it out loud to anyone in years. "My brother took my fiancée." Samuel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "And what do you want? What are you carrying all this weight for?" "Justice," I said. He shook his head slowly. You're not carrying it for justice. You're carrying it for 幸好和幸好. You're carrying it because some part of you still loves her, and you don't know how to stop, and the anger is easier than the grief." I wanted to hit him. I wanted to throw my glass at the wall and walk out and never see him again. But instead I sat there, and I felt the truth of his words land in me like a stone dropped into still water, and I felt the ripples thread through everything I thought I knew about myself. "I know," I said. "I know." But knowing wasn't enough. Knowing didn't bring her back. Knowing didn't give me the lass that was stolen from me on an October afternoon 20 years ago. Knowing just made the wound hurt differently, a deep, persistent ache instead of the sharp, slashing pain of the first cut. Samuel introduced me to his world, the world of finance, of deals, of the kind of money that move in and out of cities like tides. He taught me about investments, about leverage, about the art of making yourself indispensable so that when the time came, you had the power to name your price. He said he saw something in me, a hunger, a focus, a willingness to do what it took, and he wanted to help me channel it into something productive. "Build something," he told me. "Build something so big that they can't ignore you. Build something that makes you untouchable. And then, when the time is right, and only you will know when that time is right, you make your move." I took his advice. I built. Over the next decade, I built a portfolio of businesses, automotive shops, a small chain of convenience stores, a real estate company that bought and renovated distressed properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods. I made money. I made a lot of money. And with the money came something I hadn't expected: power. The kind of power that doesn't announce itself but is felt in every room you enter. The kind of power that makes people listen when you speak, even if you're speaking softly. I became Michael Cooper, self-made man. I became the story people tell about the boy from rural Kentucky who built an empire from nothing. I gave interviews. I sat on boards. I wore suits that cost more than my father earned in a year, and I ate at restaurants where the wine cost more than my mother's car, and I walked through buildings with my name on them and felt nothing. Nothing that lasted. Nothing that filled the space, because that space was still hers. That space would always be hers. Love, quiet, forbidden midlife romance. Subscribe to Jinghao Xinghao Noise Awakening Xinghao Xinghao for more slow burn stories of passion, betrayal, and second chances. The call came on a first day in March. I was in New York, staying at the hotel in the Upper West Side, looking out the window at Central Park at the first pale suggestion of spring on the trace. My zone 1. The caller ID said David Tupper. Mikey, David said. His voice sounded strange, older, heavier. He was 58 now. We were both getting older. Mom's sick. It's bad. My mother had been in good health her whole life, a tough, wary woman who had outlived her husband, and her oldest son David had died in a car accident 8 years prior, a fact I still couldn't process and who had simply refused to be diminished by any of it. But she was 83 now, and the years had finally topped up. What do you need? I said. I need you to come home. Home. The word hit me in a place I thought I armor over completely. Harrogate. The white clapper house. The wisteria. The porch with the creaking swing. The church on the hill with the bell. The cemetery where my father was buried, next to an empty space that had been waiting for my mother for 20 years. I was on a plane within 48 hours. I drove from the Lexington airport in a rental car, and the landscape outside the window shifted from interstate to twin highway to the familiar red dirt roads of home, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I didn't know was clenched. I pulled into the driveway of my mother's house at dusk. The wisteria was just beginning to bud tiny clusters of purple-green along the ancient vines, not yet blooming but close. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The porch needed painting. The white clapboard had faded to something closer to gray, but it was still standing. After everything, it was still standing. My mother was in the living room, in her armchair by the window. She was thinner, threadier, but her eyes, those sharp, dark eyes that had always seen too much, were the same. She looked at me when I walked in, and she said, "Michael Cooper, look at you. You look like $1 million and 10 minutes of hell at the same time." "Mom," I said, and I crossed the room and knelt beside her chair and held her hand, and she held mine, and for a long moment neither of us said anything. "You came back," she said. "I came back." She patted my cheek with her other hand. "It's about time." I stayed for a week. I took care of her, made her soup, drove her to doctor's appointments in Lexington, sat with her in the innings and watched the television shows she liked, the ones with the judges who yell at people and the game shows where contestants cry when they win. I fixed things around the house. I repaired the porch railing that had been setting for years, and I repainted the kitchen cabinets that had been peeling since before I left, and I cleaned the gutters and fixed the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom, and every time I picked up a tool and felt that familiar certainty in my hands, I thought about my father. On the 4th day, my mother said, "He's still here, you know." I didn't ask who she meant. There was only one person she could mean. "I know," I said. "He's not the man he was," she said. She was looking out the window at the wisteria, her face unreadable. "The business went under. The car dealership, he lost it in 2008. The house, too. He and Rebecca, they lost everything. They moved back here 2 years ago, into the old Patterson place on Elm. I kept painting the cabinet door in my hands. I didn't look up. She's been gone 10 years now," my mother continued. "Rebecca, she left Vincent after Lily turned 18. Moved to the coast somewhere, Georgia, I think. Lily went with her. Vincent stayed." I set the cabinet door down. I looked at my mother. Lest him, I said. My mother met my eyes. She never loved him, Michael. Not really. She told me that herself, years ago. She said she made a mistake, the worst mistake of her life, and she spent 20 years trying to live with it. She said the only real love she ever felt was with you. I stood up. I walked to the window. I looked out at the wisteria, at the tiny buds forming along the vines, at the old porch swing that still hung from the ceiling of the porch even though no one had sat on it in years. She was with him for 20 years, I said. She had his child. She built a life with him. She was trying to convince herself, my mother said softly. That's not the same as living. I rested my forehead against the cool glass of the window. Outside, the evening light was fading, and the first stars were beginning to appear over Harrogate, Kentucky, the town I had changed from, the town I had tried so hard to leave behind. Where is he now? I said. Vincent. He works at the garage on Route 32, the one that used to be Dale's. He manages it for the new owner. It's the only job he could get. My brother, who could sell us to a man freezing to death, who had taken everything from me with a smile and a handshake and a beer toasted to the happy couple. My brother was managing a garage on Route 30 now, making $8 an hour, coming home to a house where no one was waiting. And I felt it then, the thing I had been carrying for 20 years, the ledger that Samuel Atokul had talked about, the debt that had been accruing interest every single day since the moment Vincent looked at the woman I love and decided to take her from me. I turned from the window. My mother was watching me. What are you going to do? She asked. I didn't answer. I didn't know yet. I knew only that for the first time in 20 years, I was close enough to him to do something. Close enough to look him in the eye. Close enough to find out if the cold plate I had thought on that August afternoon still had a point. The garage on Route 32 was exactly what I expected, a squat metal building with 2 service bays, one of which was open, and a small office tacked onto the front with a window that hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. There were 3 cars up on lifts, and the smell of grease and transmission fluid hung in the air so thick you could taste it. I put in a black Mercedes S-Class that I had listed in New York because the board meetings required a certain kind of car. It was absurdly out of place in this parking lot, next to the rusted pickups and the 20-year-old Sedan, and I knew it the moment I parked. I didn't care. I walked into the office. The air conditioning was broken on, maybe it had never worked. A desk fan whisked in the corner, and behind the desk, with his feet up and a styrofoam cup of coffee in his hand, was my brother Vincent. He was 58 years old. He looked 70. His hair had gone completely gray, and his face was lined and weathered in a way that spoke of years of drinking and worry. He had lost weight, not the healthy kind of loss, but the kind that comes from stress and poor eating and the slow, grinding weight of having to start over when you're too old to start over. His eye, once so bright and confident, had gone flat and dull. He looked up when I walked in. He didn't recognize me for a moment. I was wearing a suit, for one thing, and I had changed in ways that went beyond the physical. But when he did recognize me, when the realization hit his face like a wave, his expression went through something I had never been able to fully describe. Surprise, shame, fear, and something else, something that looked almost like relief. Mikey, he said. He set the coffee down. His hands were shaking. Don't call me that, I said. Michael, he corrected himself. He stood up. He was shorter than me now. I had grown into my height in my 30s, broadened out, become someone who filled the room. He looked like a small man standing across from me. A tired, broken man who had been carrying his own weight for a very long time. I heard about your mother, he said. I'm sorry she's sick. Thank you. Silence. The fan whisked. Somewhere in the garage, a wrench clanged against concrete. I thought about calling you, he said. So many times. I picked up the phone and I put it down. I didn't know what to say. That's interesting, I said, because I always knew exactly what to say. I just didn't have the chance to see it. He flinched. Not much. Vincent had always been good at hiding his reactions, but I saw it. 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to see it. 20 years ago, I was a boy in love who believed his brother was incapable of betrayal. I'm not going to stand here and make excuses, he said. His voice was quiet, but steady. What I did was wrong. I knew it was wrong then, and I know it's wrong now. I took something from you that I can never give back. You're right, I said. You can't. He nodded. He didn't look away. He met my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in Vincent Cooper that I hadn't seen before. The truth. The full, unvarnished weight of what he had done, sitting behind his eyes like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. I was jealous of you, he said. I know how that sounds. I'm the older brother. I was supposed to have everything first. But you had something I never had. That thing you had with Rebecca, that feeling, that certainty. I had never felt anything like that. And I wanted it. And I was selfish enough and broken enough to take it from you instead of going out and finding my own. You were jealous, I repeated. The words sounded absurd in the context of what he had distorted. I was desperate, he said. I know that's not an excuse. It isn't. But I was a man who had everything on the outside and nothing on the inside. And Rebecca looked at you the way I had always wanted someone to look at me. And I was too weak to do the right thing, so I did the wrong thing, and I lived with it. And it ate me alive every single day. He sat back down. He put his head in his hands. And for the first time in my life, I watched my brother cry. I left the garage without saying another word. I drove back to my mother's house in the black Mercedes, and I parked in the driveway, and I sat there for a long time with the engine running and the windows up, watching the wisteria in the last light of the day. I had imagined this moment so many times. I had imagined confronting Vincent in hotel rooms in a dozen cities, in the sleepless hours between 2 and 4 in the morning, in the quiet spaces between one thought and the next. I had imagined him denying it. I had imagined him being cruel. I had imagined him fighting back. What I had never imagined was him crying. I had never imagined him saying the words 幸好 I was jealous of you 幸好. I had never imagined him looking so utterly, completely broken. I thought about Rebecca. I thought about the girl with the wrong glasses who laughed so hard she had to take them off. I thought about our daughter, who had been born and raised by the man who stole her from me, who had told Vincent 幸好 Dad 幸好 for 18 years, who had left with her mother when Rebecca finally found the courage to walk away. I had a daughter. I had a daughter whose name was Lily and whose eyes were probably Rebecca's eyes and whose last had happened entirely without me. I thought about the ledger. The theory of the ledger that Samuel had talked about, the idea that every wrong older death, that the skills demanded balance. For 20 years, I had believed in that ledger. I had structured my entire life around the belief that what Vincent did to me would eventually be paid back, that the universe takes account, that there was a price to be collected. But standing in that garage, watching my brother weed, I understood something that I hadn't understood before. The ledger was real, but the only person it was bankrupting was me. Vincent was paying his debt every day, in the grinding exhaustion of the job he was too talented for, in the shell of a life that had crumbled around him, in the 20 years of shame that had tarred those lines into his face and bent his shoulders into a permanent slump. He was paying. He had been paying all along. And so had I. I had been paying in the currency of my own loss. Every relationship I had sabotaged because I couldn't let go. Every night I had lain awake thinking about a woman who had made her choice 20 years ago and who had lived and suffered the consequences of it. Every year I had spent building an empire that meant nothing because the one thing I truly wanted had been taken and could never be returned by any amount of money or power or revenge. Roberta left him. She had left him. She had lived with the mistake for 20 years and then she had found the courage to walk away. And I hadn't known in all those years of assuming she had built a happy life with my brother, I hadn't known that she had been as unhappy as I had been. And Lily, my daughter, she was 20 years old now. She was grown. She had lived her life without me, and I had lived mine without her. And there was no ladder entry in the world that could comfort that. I got out of the car. I walked to the front porch. I sat on the swing that hadn't been used in years, and I pushed off with my foot, and the swing creaked and groaned and held, and I sat there in the evening air with the wisteria blooming for the first time, that spring purple and white and impossibly beautiful, and I felt something begin to shift in my chest. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. I wasn't ready to call it forgiveness. It was something more like the first crack in a damn small, tentative fissure in the wall I had built to contain 20 years of pain. It wasn't letting go. It was just beginning to consider the possibility that I could love quiet, so bidding me life romance. Subscribe to 星号 noise awaiting me 星号 for more slow burn stories of passion, betrayal, and second chances. I stayed another 2 weeks in Harrogate. I sat with my mother every morning and evening. I drove her to appointments and cooked her meals and sat with her on the porch in the evenings when the weather was warm enough. I told her about my businesses, about the cities I'd lived in, about the people I'd met, and laughed out the loneliness, the hollow spaces, the night I spent in hotel rooms wondering if this was all there was. I went back to the garage on Route 32 3 more times. Not to confront Vincent, I was past that. I went because there was something I needed to understand, something I needed to see with my own eyes before I could close this chapter. On my second visit, we talked, really talked, for the first time since we were both. He told me about his life after I left, how the car dealership had been successful for a while, how Roberta had been a good wife in the ways that mattered most, little, devoted to Lily, a wonderful mother, but how she had never fully belonged to him. I could feel it, he said, every day. That piece of her that was always somewhere else. That piece of her that was yours. He told me about the financial collapse, how the dealership had been over-leveraged, how he lost everything in a matter of months, how Rebecca had filed for divorce the same week the bank foreclosed on the house. She didn't leave me for someone else, he said. She just laughed. She said she couldn't pretend anymore. She said she had been pretending for 20 years and she was too tired to keep going. He told me about Lily, how she had struggled in her teenage years, angry and confused, and how she had eventually gone to therapy and come out the other side a thoughtful, grounded young woman. How she called him every Sunday. How she was in graduate school in Savannah, studying social work. She wants to help people who come from broken homes, Vincent said, and there was something in his worst pride, maybe, or gratitude, or the desperate hope that his own brokenness hadn't been passed down to his daughter. She knows about me, I said. Some of it. Not everything. Not yet. He paused. She knows Rebecca loves someone for me. She knows it ended badly. She's smart enough to put the pieces together if she ever meets you. I didn't know what to do with that. The idea of a daughter, a grown woman with a life of her own who might one day look at me and know that I was the man her mother almost married. I didn't know if that was a gift or a curse. On my third visit, I gave Vincent the card, my personal card, with my cell phone number and my email and nothing else, no company name, no title, just Michael Cooper, and a number in Lexington that connected to my assistant. He looked at it for a long time. If Lily ever wants to talk, I said. If she reaches up, don't stand in her way. He nodded. He didn't say thank you. Some things are too big for thank you. The letter arrived at my Manhattan apartment 3 weeks after I returned from Harrogate. I recognized the handwriting on the envelope before I even read the return address. Rebecca's handwriting, that same looking script I had fallen in love with 23 years ago in a diner on Main Street. I didn't open it for 2 days. I left it on my desk, and I went for a run in Central Park, and I came back, and I showered, and I made coffee, and I sat in my living room looking at the envelope like it was a grenade. Finally, I opened it. 星号 Dear Metal, 星号. 星号, I don't know if you read this. I don't know if you're even the person I remember anymore, the bowl with the sugar bowl and the furious as who made me laugh so hard I cried. I like to think you are. I like to think that somewhere inside the man you become, the boy is still there, still reading books and fixing things and feeling things so deeply it frightens him. 星号. 星号, I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and I know you can't give it. I'm writing because I had carried the weight of what I did to you for 20 years. And I need you to know, I need you to finally hear from me directly that I am sorry. I am so sorry, 星号. 星号, I made a choice that disturbed you, and I have to live with that every day of my life. Not because Vincent manipulated me, he did, but that's not an excuse, but because I was weak. I was young and I was impressionable and I was flattered by the attention of a man who saw something in me that your quiet sincerity didn't capture. I didn't have the strength to resist it, and I didn't have the courage to fight for what I knew was real when it started to slip away. 星号. 星号, I spent 20 years in a marriage that was a beautiful lie. I loved my daughter more than anything in this world. And I tried to love the man I chose, but the truth is that I never fully arrived in that love. Part of me was always in Harrogate, always in the apartment above the hardware store, always in the garden with the wisteria where you put that ring on my finger, and I cried because I was so happy and so afraid at the same time. 星号. 星号, I left Vincent 10 years ago. I left in Savannah now, near Lily. I teach 2nd grade. I never stop teaching. Some mornings I wake up and I can't remember where I am. And for a distinct second I think I'm in that apartment, and you're in the next room reading one of your books, and everything is exactly the way it should be. And then I open my eyes, and I'm here, and I have to learn all over again how to live with the shape of the hole in my life. 星号. 星号, I don't expect anything from you, Michael. Not a response, not forgiveness, not even acknowledgement. I just needed you to know that you were real, that what we had was real, that I didn't imagine it or make it up or mistake it for something it wasn't. You were the love of my life. You still are. And I lost you because I wasn't brave enough to keep you, 星号. 星号, if you ever want to talk, not to reconcile, not to start over, just to talk, my number is below, 星号. 星号, all my love, 星号. 星号, Rebecca, 星号. I read the letter 4 times. I read it until I knew every word by heart, until the shape of her handwriting was as familiar to me as my own face. And then I set it down, and I walked to the window, and I looked out at the city, the millions of lights, the millions of lives, the millions of people who had all been hurt and had all healed and had all found some way to keep going, and I felt that damn crack a little further. I called her, not to reconcile, not to start over, just to talk, just to hear her voice for the first time in 20 years. She answered on the 3rd ring. Michael, she said, and just my name, spoken in her words, that voice I had carried in my memory like a photograph in my wallet, always there, always clothes, and something inside me that had been locked for 20 years open all the way. Rebecca, I said, I'm here. And for the first time since I was 20 years old and sitting in a diner with sugar all over my shirt, I wasn't alone. I went to Savannah in June. I sat across from Rebecca Stone, not the girl with the wrong glasses, not the woman in the courthouse wedding photo, but someone in between, someone who had lived 20 years of a hard life and had come up the other side with lines around her eyes and gray in her hair and a quietness in her voice that I recognized because I heard it in my own. And we talked. For 3 hours, we talked about the past, about the years between, about the choices we had made and the ones we wished we had made differently. It wasn't a romance. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was the beginning, a tentative, careful, honest beginning that neither of us pushed too hard, too fast. I met Lily. She looked at me across the restaurant table with her mother's eyes, those white, searching eyes behind her own pair of round wire-frame glasses, and she said, "So you're the one who taught my mom to laugh with hysteria." "She taught herself," I said. "I just showed her where to find it." She smiled. It was Rebecca's smile. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I hadn't felt in 20 years. The possibility that the ledger could finally close. Not because revenge had been extracted, not because justice had been served, but because some wounds heal not by closing but by being finally, fully seen. 星号 Love Quiet, Forbidden Midlife Romance. Subscribe to 星号 A noise awaiting me 星号 for more slow burn stories of passion, betrayal, and second chances. 星号. 3 months after Savannah, I went back to Harrogate one final time. Not for Vincent, not for revenge, for my mother. She died on a Sunday morning in September, with the wisteria just beginning to turn, the first leaves of autumn slipping from the vine's light pages from a book that was finally, gently closing. She was in her armchair by the window, and the last thing she saw was the garden she had tended for 60 years. The vines she had planted the year my father proposed, the porch swing where her youngest son had sat and finally after 20 years began to let go. I held her hand when she went. Vincent was there. So was Lily, who had flown in from Savannah, and Rebecca, who had come because she said she owed my mother that much, and my mother, in her last week of consciousness, had looked at Rebecca and said, "You were always like a daughter to me, even when you broke my boy's heart." Especially then. At the funeral, Vincent stood beside me. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We stood at the grave in our suits, his rented, mine bespoke, and we watched them lower the casket into the ground next to my father, and the church bell rang, and wisteria was everywhere, purple and gold in the September light, and I thought about how my mother had said the bell would ring for her, and how she had been right, and how everything she had ever said had been true, and how the truest thing she ever said was this: "星号, you come back when you're ready. Michael Cooper, 星号." I was ready. I had been ready for a long time. I just hadn't known it until I let myself feel the full weight of what I had been carrying and discovered that I was strong enough to set it down. After the funeral, Vincent and I stood on the porch. The wisteria was going to see long, dangling pods that would split open in the winter and scatter their offspring on the wind, so that next spring there would be new vines climbing up the east side of the house, new growth from the old roots, left from something that had seemed finished. "And not asking you to forgive me," Vincent said. "I know I don't deserve that." "No," I said. "You don't." He nodded. He could take it. He had been taking it for 20 years. "But I want you to know," I said, "that I'm done. I'm done carrying it. I'm done with the ledger, the score, the debt. I'm done being the man who got betrayed, and moving on. And if you want to be a part of that's the real part, not the brother who took my fiancée, but the brother who survived his own mistakes, then that's your choice to make." He looked at me. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he said, "I'd like that. I'd like that more than you know." We shook hands. Not like brothers, not yet. Maybe not ever, but like two men who had both been broken by the same event and who had both, in their own ways, began to heal. I went back to New York. I went back to my last businesses, the board meetings, the deals and the negotiations and the endless, exhausting machinery of commerce. But something had changed. I wasn't carrying the weight anymore. I was just Michael Cooper, the man who had been hurt and had survived, the man who had lost everything and had rebuilt, the man who still in quiet moments, in the space between sleep and waking, in the garden of his memory saw a woman with round glasses laughing at a sugar bowl that had tipped over on a spring afternoon, in a dinner in a small town in Kentucky. Roberta and I talked on the phone every week, sometimes twice. We didn't talk about the future, we were too old and to start for grand plans, but we talked about the present, about our days, about Lily's graduate school research, about the books we were reading, about the way the light changed in Savannah in October. We were learning each other again, slowly, carefully, the way you learn a language you used to speak fluently but have forgotten through disuse. One evening in November, she called me. It was late past 10 and I was in my apartment, standing by the window with a glass of bourbon I hadn't touched, looking out at the city lights. "Michael," she said, "I'm here." "I was just thinking," she said, "about that day, in the diner, when you knocked over the sugar." I smiled. She couldn't see it, but she could hear it in my voice. "I remember. I fell in love with you right then," she said, "before you even said your name. I looked at you sitting there with sugar all over your shirt and your glasses crooked and this look on your face like you were terrified of me. And I thought, 星号 this one. This is the one, 星号. I was terrified of you, I said. You were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. And you were the most earnest man I'd ever met, she said. You still are. We were quiet for a moment. The city hummed below me. Somewhere in the distance, a siren rose and fell. Rebecca, I said. Yes. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if we're capable of starting over. But I know I want to find out. If you do. She was quiet for a long time. And then she said, I've been waiting 20 years for you to say that. I wasn't sure you ever would. I booked a flight to Savannah the next morning. 星号 Love Quiet, Forbidden Midlife Romance. Subscribe to 星号 Noise Awakening 星号 for more slow burn stories of passion, betrayal, and second chances. 星号. Savannah in November is unlike anywhere else on earth. The Spanish moss hangs from the live oaks like gray silk, and the light comes through it in a way that makes everything look like a tinting soft-edged, golden, timeless. The heat of summer has broken, and the air is cool and clean, and the streets of the Histove district are quiet in a way that feels less like emptiness and more like peace. Roberta picked me up at the airport. She was wearing a blue dress I had never seen before, and her hair was shorter than it was in my memories, and she had new glasses, still round, still wire frame, but different. And when she saw me walk through the arrival store, her face did something I had not seen it do in 20 years. It lit up. The whole of it as an smile, and the particular way her head tilted, the entire landscape of her face transformed into something radiant and alive. And I thought, 星号 there she is. There's my Rebecca. She's still here. Hi, she said. Hi, I said. We stood there in the airport, two people in their 50s surrounded by travelers who had no idea that the moment happening between us was the combination of 20 years of loss and grief and finally, improbably, miraculously, hope. She took me to her house. It was a small shotgun cottage on a tree-lined street, painted the color of the, I know, not that. I will say it properly, painted the color of the sea on a calm day. A blue-greens that was both soothing and alive. There were plants on the porch, just like the apartment in Harrogate, and wind chimes made of sea glass, and a swing chair where she sat every morning with her toffee and watched the street come to life. She made me lunch. A simple salad, bread she had baked herself, lemonade from the lemons in her backyard. We sat at her kitchen table, a small, star wooden table with two chairs and a vase of flowers from her garden, and we ate and talked about nothing and everything, about Lily's research, about my latest business deal, about a book she'd been reading about the history of the Georgia coast, about the way the lights change in the late afternoon and turn everything amber. And then, in the quiet that settled over us after the meal, Rebecca looked at me across the table with those eyes that had never stopped seeing me, even when I couldn't see myself, and she said, What do you want, Michael? Really? Not what you think you should want, not what's reasonable, not what's the smart thing to do at your age. What do you actually want? I thought about it. I really thought about it, not the answer I had practiced, not the diplomatic, careful response that business had taught me to give, but the real one. The one that lived in the room in my heart that I had kept locked for 20 years. You, I said. I want you. I have always wanted you. I never stopped. She closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek, just one, a single tear that she didn't wipe away. I know, she said. I know. I've always known. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were thinner than I remembered, lined with the years, but the touch was the same. The warmth was the same. The sense of being 星号 known 星号 being seen through and accepted anyway was the same. And for a moment I was 20 years old again, sitting in a diner in Harrogate, watching a woman with wrong glasses laugh at the sugar I had not everywhere. And I thought, 星号 this is what I was holding on for. This moment, this feeling, this person. Everything else was just a long way around. We didn't rush it. We weren't young anymore. We didn't have the luxury of the reckless certainty of youth, the belief that love was in us and everything else would work itself out. We knew too much. We had been burned too badly. We had both built walls and moats and fortresses around the soft, tender thing at the center of ourselves, and we were both afraid, terrified that if we let our guard down one more time, the loss would be even worse. So we went slowly. We dated. We took walks through the historic district and sat on benches and watched the tourists go by. We went to dinner at the restaurant she loved, the one with the low country bowl, the one with the she crab soup, the one with the backyard garden where they grew their own vegetables. I flew to Savannah every other week. She flew to New York once. We talked on the phone every night. And in the spaces between, in the quiet hours when I was alone in my apartment and she was alone in her cottage, and the distance between as felt both enormous and insignificant, I thought about the ledger, about Samuel's theory of the ledger, about the idea that every wrong demanded payment, that the universe kept accounts. I had spent 20 years believing in that ledger. I had structured my entire identity around it, the wrong man, the survivor, the man who would make his brother pay. And now, sitting in a cafe in Savannah with the woman my daughter stole from me, watching her read the menu and frown slightly at the options and then look up and smile at me with such warmth and familiarity, I understood something that Samuel had tried to tell me years ago. The ledger is a lie we tell ourselves to avoid feeling the full weight of grief. The ledger is a wall we build to keep from admitting that something, once broken, cannot be repaired with interest. The ledger is a story we tell so we don't have to feel the raw, enormous, terrifying truth that we loved someone, and we lost them, and we survived. And the surviving is not the same as the healing, and the healing is not the same as the forgetting, and the forgetting is not what we want anyway. What we want is to remember without it destroying us, to carry the past without it crushing us, to look as the face of the person we lost and still be able to breathe. Rebecca and I, we are not a fairy tale. We are not the ending of a love story that resumes exactly where it left off, as if the intervening 20 years were just a pause, a held breath, a skipped chapter. We are two people who were in love once, who lost each other, who made terrible choices and lived with the consequences, who found our ways back to each other older and fatter and wiser and more afraid and more hopeful than we have ever been. We are beginning. That is all. That is everything. 星号 Love Quiet, Forbidden Me Life Romance. Subscribe to 星号 Noise Awaiting Me 星号 for more slow burn stories of passion, betrayal, and second chances. 星号. 6 months after that first visit to Savannah, I sold my stake in the businesses. Not all of them, not the ones that required my daily presence, but enough of them. I hired a CEO for the automotive chain. I promoted a talented woman named Diana Wu to run the real estate company. I kept a consulting role and I sat on the boards. But I freed up my time, the most valuable thing I owned, the thing I had spent 20 years trading for money and power and influence. I moved to Savannah. I rented a house 3 blocks from Roberta's cottage, close enough to walk to her in the morning, far enough to maintain the space that 2 people who have learned to protect themselves need. I am pet my back. I hung my father's old watch on the wall in the kitchen, next to the window where the morning light came in. I placed the photograph from the picnic by the river on the mantel, the one of us on the blanket, her head on my shoulder, the light perfect. Rebecca helped me move in. She brought more plants because of course she did, and she hung curtains in the windows and rearranged my kitchen cabinets, and told me I had been living like a month and someone needed to teach me how to be comfortable in my own home. I'd been comfortable for 20 years, I told her. I was just waiting for the right company. She rolled her eyes. That was terrible. You're laughing. I'm laughing in spite of myself. That night, we sat on her porch, my porch now, twin the swing chair, and we watched the fireflies come out over the garden, and the Spanish moss moved in the breeze, and the sky turned from blue to purple to black and filled with stars, and neither of us said anything for a long time. And then she said, very quietly, do you think it was worth it? The 20 years. Everything we went through. Do you think it was worth it to get here? I didn't have an answer right away. I thought about the question, really thought about it, turning it over in my mind the way I used to turn over a broken engine part, examining every surface, every angle, every possible explanation. No, I said finally. It wasn't worth it. No. She was looking at the fireflies. But, I continued, I am here, and you are here, and I would not treat this porch, this evening, this moment for any version of the past where it never happened. Because if it never happened, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be us. And I don't know if I love thee as we are more than thee as we would have been, but I love this as enough to want to find out. She was quiet for a long time, and then she turned to me, and she took my face in her hands, her warm, weathered, real hands, and she looked at me the way she had looked at me in the diner 25 years ago, before everything, before the sugar and the rain and the betrayal and the 20 years of silence. And she said, I love you, Michael Cooper. I love you then, and I love you now, and I will love you tomorrow. Whatever comes next, however this ends, I will love you for the rest of my life. And I believe her. For the first time in 20 years, I believe someone when they said they love me. Some people asked me if I ever got my revenge. If Vincent paid, if the ledger was settled, if the scales were balanced. I tell them what I have learned. There is no revenge. There is only the life you choose to live after the thing that broke you. There is only what you do with the years you have left. There is only the morning light through a window, and a woman with round glasses making coffee in the kitchen, and the sound of the swing chair rocking back and forth on a porch in Savannah, Georgia, and the quiet knowledge that you survive not just the betrayal, not just the loss, but the hardest part of all, the letting go. My brother is still in Harrogate. We talk on the phone every few weeks. We are not close, we may never be close, but we are no longer enemies. He knows where I am. He knows about Rebecca. He said he was glad, and I believe him. I think, for Vincent, my happiness is the final payment on a debt he has spent 20 years trying to repay. Lily is getting married next spring. She asked me to walk her down the aisle not instead of Vincent, but in addition to him. Both her fathers. She wants both of us there. She wants to begin her married life with the full truth of where she came from, not the sanitized version, not the simplified version, but the real, messy, heartbreaking, hopeful version. The version where people make terrible mistakes and live with the consequences and somehow, against all odds, find their way to something like grace. I told her yes. Of course I told her yes.